How do you end a trilogy? Do you go out with a bang, a massive, huge climax to satisfy everything that the previous entries have been building up to? Or do you try to keep a consistent energy that the previous games had? A trilogy in video games is a difficult thing. A lot of games tend to lose steam by the time they get there, slowly declining with each installment. Some find a groove and improve each time, leading up to a massive final entry that shocks and surprises. Mass Effect surely had its hands full, trying to follow up its greatest entry while also concluding the series, wrapping up storylines, and making fans feel satisfied. Mass Effect also has a peculiar and unique responsibility here that we'll talk about a lot throughout this video. Impact. Any other trilogy that doesn't focus on a choice-based narrative doesn't have this responsibility to focus on impact. But when a player has been making choices for years across two other entries, they expect that their choices will matter. Throwing this responsibility on top of all the others to create another interesting narrative, to make something compelling, to create a satisfying end to the story, to tie up loose ends, makes for an uphill climb. We're going to see today whether Mass Effect 3 finishes its series with a bang or a whimper. I'll be honest, I haven't played this game since it was released. I never went back to this entry, and going into this video, I was eager to see how I felt about it now. So that's what we're going to find out today. Does Mass Effect 3 create a satisfying ending to the trilogy that began back in 2007? We will be diving deep into the game. We'll talk about gameplay, mechanics, story, and everything in between. If you haven't seen my previous two videos on the Mass Effect series, you should probably go watch those now. It'll give you good context for the story itself and the choices that I made with both of my characters. If you enjoy the video and would like to support the channel for free, you can do so by liking the video and subscribing, as it really helps me out with that primordial, unearthly, eldritch algorithm. You can also support the channel by subscribing to the Patreon, where I upload longer versions of the full series retrospectives and text post update ramblings from yours truly. You can also follow me on Twitch to watch me play games that I'm not currently reviewing. Spoilers for everything Mass Effect 3, and some spoilers for Mass Effect and Mass Effect 2. Hey Dad, it's me, your favorite son, and today I'd like to talk about Mass Effect 3. Before we get into Mass Effect 3, I want to say that this video is sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends. When I get into a game, I want to know everything about its backstory and lore. You all know I'm a little lore fiend, and Raid Shadow Legends does not disappoint. It has a deep and dark fantasy world with backgrounds for its nearly 700 unique champions. Even the bosses have interesting histories to be looked into. Plus, now's a great time to start because the campaign is going on a huge adventure to help the Arbiter beat back the forces of darkness, which is a fantastic point to get into the story of Raid. Opening shards is always a great experience as well. You never know what you're gonna get, like this Amarantine skeleton. Skeleton, another rare? Wow. Raid also has some special events going on right now that you can take advantage of. They have a new champion based entirely off of the MMA fighter and pro wrestler Ronda Rousey. You can get this champion entirely for free just by playing Raid for 7 days between now and February 20th. You can also use the special promo code RAIDRONDA to get a 3-day 100% XP boost, 500k silver, and 5 full energy refills. Also, be sure to join in the festive Christmas event, which has a new wintry story and mini-games that'll win you in-game and real-life prizes. Head to 12daysofraid.plarium.com, enter in your player ID, and join in on this festive event. And if you're a new player to Raid, click my link in the description or scan the QR code that's on the screen to get unique bonuses worth $35, including the bonus champion Jotun. All of this treasure will be waiting for you here, available for 30 days for new players only. So make sure to click the link in the description to get those free bonuses. Now, back to Mass Effect 3. Just like the second entry in the series, Mass Effect 3 began development before the previous game was released. Because the consoles that the third game was being developed for were at the end of their generations, the team didn't focus much on the tech this time. They spent more time trying to optimize the gameplay and tell a story. They once again took feedback from fans to develop the game, using this information to adjust the gameplay and design. Since fans weren't happy with the role-playing systems being removed for Mass Effect 2, the team tried to add more customization options for Mass Effect 3. Casey Hudson, the returning director of the Mass Effect series, wanted to make large improvements to the combat. The team focused on enemy animations and shaking up the battles to make them less telegraphed. Mass Effect 3 had over 40,000 lines of dialogue compared to the first game's 20,000. The lead writer on the third game was changed from Drew Karpyshyn to Mac Walters. Walters had co-led the writing on Mass Effect 2, so he was familiar with the series. Karpyshyn left Mass Effect to work on Star Wars: The Old Republic. Oops. The game's narrative was collaboratively worked on by a team, with each writer focusing on a particular character or story arc. The ending of the story was something that the team worked on for quite a while. It took them time to settle on an ending for the series. They had many original plans that were cut, including endings that saw Shepard modified by Reaper tech and confronted by the Viermeyer survivor, the Elusive Man being transformed by Reaper tech and becoming the final boss of the game, and the Reapers trying to stop organics from using dark energy as it was bringing about the end of the universe. The game itself was supposed to take under 2 years to complete. The original release date was set for the fourth quarter of 2011, but eventually had to be moved to the first quarter of 2012. Mass Effect 3 released on Windows, PlayStation 3, and Xbox 360 on March 6, 2012. A few notes before we get into things. As I've said in my previous 2 Mass Effect videos, I decided to play the Legendary Edition of all the Mass Effect games for these reviews. This was a remastering of the entire trilogy that mostly upgraded the games visually and tried to make them more cohesive. As a trilogy, and a series that puts choices at the forefront, having all 3 games feel pretty similar works a little bit better. The first game had quite a few changes, but by the time we get to the end of the series, that isn't the case. The visual updates for the third game are minimal and barely noticeable. The gameplay changes are mostly focused around removing the multiplayer components so that it doesn't have an effect on the single-player part of the game. The other note that I have is about the structure of this review. If you've seen any of my other videos, you'll know that I structure my reviews around the games themselves. I try to tailor each review to the game that I'm talking about. Mass Effect is a choice-based narrative. Your choices are supposed to affect the game around you and the story that it tells. Because of that, I'll first talk about Mass Effect 3, its story, its gameplay, viewing all these things through the lens of my main playthrough, the Paragon one. This is the playthrough where I generally try to choose the Paragon options or the morally good ones. At the end of the video, we'll go back and talk about my Renegade playthrough, where I try to make the morally bad options and make a stark contrast to see if the game is really that different. When we start Mass Effect 3, we are, for one final time, allowed to import our character. I imported my character from Mass Effect 2. This time we're given a nifty little list of choices that we made in the previous games. One that sort of spoils what choices we've made that are going to have an effect on this game. It's kind of like watching a previously on section of a new episode of TV, and you see a scene with a character from like 2 seasons ago, and all of a sudden you realize exactly what's going to happen. I kept the same appearance from the previous entries, and I stayed a soldier class. Now, before we actually get into the story of Mass Effect 3, we actually need to talk about a Mass Effect 2 DLC really quick. I didn't talk about this DLC in my last video because the story kind of leads right into Mass Effect 3. I figured I would just quickly talk about it at the beginning of this one. This DLC is called Arrival, and sees Shepard getting a message from Admiral Hackett. I played this DLC after my playthrough of Mass Effect 2, mostly because I see it as sort of an epilogue to the main story. Hackett's friend, Dr. Kenson, has been captured by some Batarians while researching Reaper artifacts. We save her and she tells us she's part of a team called The Project. They found a Reaper artifact called Object Rho. It behaved similarly to the artifact we found in the first game, giving them visions of a Reaper invasion. We find out that the Alpha Relay is critical to that invasion, because they can travel to the relay from any point in the galaxy. Kenson reveals their plan to place thrusters on the base and crash it into the Alpha Relay, destroying it and delaying the Reaper invasion for a bit. The only problem is, the destruction of the relay would cause the 300,000 Batarian colonists in the system to be killed. We found out that the researchers have been indoctrinated by the Reaper artifact. They are now trying to stop the destruction of the relay, and Shepard is captured with only a short period of time before the Reapers arrive. At the end, before Shepard leaves the asteroid to let it destroy the relay, he's confronted with Harbinger, a Reaper itself. He tells Shepard that humans fighting back is futile, that they will still arrive. Shepard gets off the asteroid and it destroys the Alpha Relay. Hackett calls and demands an explanation as 300,000 Batarians are now dead and the species are now ready for war. Shepard explains that there was no other way, and Hackett tells him he'll be investigated back on Earth. When we start Mass Effect 3, the Reaper invasion is happening. Hackett and Anderson are picking up signals that they're here, that Shepard was right. We're finally on Earth, and Shepard is no longer commander of the Normandy. James Vega, an Alliance lieutenant, is taking Shepard before the committee to talk about what happened with the Alpha Relay. To put this into perspective, Shepard, who to the Council and most of the public seems like a crazy person, a hero, but someone that believes the Reapers are coming to destroy the galaxy. He's been crying wolf for a while and nobody believes him. Then, in service of stopping that invasion, he killed 300,000 people. At this point, Shepard would seem to be some sort of crazed fanatic, and of course he'd be stripped of his title. Anderson knows he's telling the truth, but it's unrealistic for him to think that he'd get away scot-free with a decision like that. We meet Ashley in the halls, who's become lieutenant commander in the Alliance. I told her it was good to see her. It had been a while. Before the hearing can be started, it's interrupted by the arrival of the Reapers. They begin to attack Earth and blow up the committee room. We have to make our way to the spaceport to get off the planet before we're killed. The place is being decimated. The Reapers are far more powerful than anything we have at this moment. We're given some tutorials here of the new systems in Mass Effect 3. Most everything works the same. We can level up like before, albeit with some slight changes to powers and abilities. There's more of an emphasis placed on melee in this entry, with an entire skill called Fitness devoted to giving you more damage. That being said, I rarely ever used it. Traversal has been a bit changed, and cover and climbing acts a bit more weird. Mass Effect 3 was definitely going for a more traversal-based movement system, except that they kept the old system they had and just kind of added on to it. When we run at a piece of cover, we'll duck behind it. This makes running through any hallway really annoying because often we'll get stuck on walls along the way. The whole movement system just feels really awkward and janky, how the camera snaps as you start to run. There were so many times where I would pop out of cover or try to use the cover running system and never knew why it wasn't working right. While in cover, we can climb on top of objects or vault over some. We can actually vault straight from a run, but you have to have a certain amount of running distance between the objects. So if you just run at it when you're close, you'll just go into cover and then have another button press to get over it. It's really not the worst thing in the world, and you kind of get used to it after a while, but in the beginning it can be really bothersome. Oh, and we can also jump over gaps now. Most everything else is the same as far as combat goes. We can shoot things with a variety of weapons and use powers to decimate them. The only thing I would note here is that Mass Effect 3 seems to have reversed progress on the difficulty front. The game was incredibly easy from the start. When I talked about Mass Effect 1, it felt like we could just run out into the middle of the battlefield and shoot enemies, not really having to worry about avoiding fire. We can stand in front of enemies for a lot of this game. There isn't a lot of importance placed on cover in this entry because we do a lot of damage and enemies don't really seem to. Heading through Earth, Shepard finds a child in a vent. He's lost and alone, afraid and scared. I tried to get him to come with us to save him, but he didn't trust me. I had to keep moving. We found an injured soldier and eventually called the Normandy's shuttle down to us. Ashley was on board with James. As I got on the ship, Anderson said he was staying on Earth. He was ready to lead the resistance against the Reapers. He wanted me to convince the Council to help with them. He reinstated me as commander of the Normandy, and we headed off. Before we left, I saw the boy again. He was getting into a shuttle, getting off this planet, to safety. Then disaster struck. His ship was destroyed, a complete and true innocent. Someone that didn't deserve to be caught in this died. This was the true casualty of war, the bystanders. The cost was too great. I had to stop this. This intro sequence is done pretty well. It's impactful, sets up the scene for the game, establishes tone, and properly puts the stakes into place. The music here is also very well done. It backs the scene perfectly and really shows that BioWare was going for a more cinematic style and feel with this entry, which I think they achieved for the most part. On the ship, we're contacted by Admiral Hackett and ordered to head to Mars. Researchers there believe they've found something that could help stop the Reapers, and Cerberus has begun attacking the place. We land down on Mars and head into the base. There's actually a cute little Easter egg here that we get by taking a specific path through the solar panels. If we do it correctly, the Mars rover Curiosity will roll on out from some rocks and give us a little nod. It's interesting to note that seemingly no one found a way to trigger this Easter egg until about 2 years ago, when the designer who added it into the game posted on Reddit telling people how to do it. We come into contact with some Cerberus forces and defeat them. Once heading into the research facility, Ashley confronted me about my involvement with Cerberus. She didn't fully trust me yet. She still thought I was somehow working for them. I tried to hearken back to our history together. She should have known that I wouldn't do that. Inside, we meet the head researcher on the project, Liara Tassoni. Here, we now have Liara and Ashley in our party, two people we haven't consistently had in our squad since Mass Effect 1. Liara reveals that Cerberus is looking for a plan for a Prothean device that would be capable of stopping the Reapers. We're introduced to quick kills, which we can do from behind a barrier, and which I literally used twice throughout the entire playthrough because it was never necessary. Maybe on the highest of difficulties this would have been a good move, but not when you can kind of just blast through everything in this game. We're shown that we can shoot through glass and introduced to the new weapon system. Weapons now have a weight associated to them. This weight will increase the amount of cooldown time on our powers. More weapons equals less power usage. This basically means if you're running a soldier build and find yourself running out of ammo or entering into situations where you need multiple ways of blasting baddies, then you can bring all the weapons you want. If you're a biotic user and you want to harness your energies faster, then stick to only a few weapons at a time. It's not a bad system and feels like it naturally weights itself to different playstyles. We get another tutorial on how to run to different pieces of cover while staying protected. This is the system that I was talking about before, or at least part of it. It's not something that I ever used like the game showed me to use it, because it always just seemed more reliable to literally run around and find cover when I needed it. Eventually, we find out Cerberus has made it to the archives. We have to take the tram to get there. Ashley finds out that the Cerberus agents have been modified somehow, and Ashley accused me of being the same, of being controlled by the Reapers. People have talked about this plot point a lot, the fact that the Viermeyer survivor mistrusts Shepard so much in this entry. Actually, seemingly everyone does. I don't love it that much, and at this point in the series, it really seems like this is the moment that everyone should have flipped and been saying sorry to Shepard. Like, oh my god, the Reapers are real. Now everything you did makes sense, dude. But they don't. They just treat every situation with trepidation, like the galaxy isn't about to be nuked or something. There is a reason for this, at least in the Viermeyer survivor's case. There's a moment later in the story when this plot line will come to a head and all of the choices that you've made with them will have an effect, but we'll talk about that later. We fight our way through more Cerberus troops and are reunited with an old friend, or should I say, enemy, the Elusive Man. Before we talk about this conversation, we should really talk about the new morality system in Mass Effect 3. The system has once again been changed greatly. There are no longer two separate morality sliders, but one slider called reputation. This is how respected or well known we are by the people around us. Doing heroic or good deeds, helping people or harming them will increase how filled this bar is. The choices that we make determine how much of that filled part of it is paragon or renegade. It's kind of difficult to explain, but it basically boils down to the more reputation you have, the more choices you can make. Instead of locking out options to the opposite morality like the previous games did, we can now choose either renegade or paragon options for big choices. We only unlock them by having a certain level of reputation first, though. If we don't have enough reputation, we won't be able to make them at all. When we meet the Elusive Man, he tells us that he doesn't want the Reapers destroyed. He wants us to use them. He wants to harvest their tech and bring humanity past where its evolution has brought it. He's gone mad with power, he wants too much, and he has someone in the facility helping him get it. Dr. Eva Kor is currently uploading the data to the Elusive Man, and we have to chase her down. This chase is very odd, especially with Mass Effect 3's strange traversal system. It's also one of the only chases in the entire game, so it's not like we're being introduced to a new system here. The whole thing just kind of feels out of place. The Doctor heads to an escape shuttle and James goes rogue, crashing his shuttle into hers. She climbs out of the wreckage though, clearly something more than human, and grabs Ashley. The Elusive Man orders her to kill Ashley and she slams her head against the burning shuttle. I took Kor down and got Ashley out of there. She was still alive, but barely. With this, we head to the Citadel to get Ashley treated. We recovered most of the data from Mars, but not all of it. Plans for a massive weapon that would be able to destroy the Reapers. We send the data to Admiral Hackett so that he can begin to analyze and possibly work on the project. We have to talk to the Council first to get support for the project. When we arrive at the Citadel, we run into Bailey, the C-Sec officer from last game who's been promoted to commander. I talked to Diana Allers in the docking area. She was a reporter that wanted to board the Normandy and report on her mission. I invited her onto the ship. I met Dr. Chakwas again and invited her back aboard the Normandy as well. We needed medical crew and she had served on the ship before. I went to see Ashley. She was bruised up but stable. I told her that I was thinking about her, even if she wasn't awake yet. I finally decided to see the Council and tell them about the data we found. Shepard requests that the Council gather war efforts and send them to Earth, but they all have their own problems to worry about. The Turian Counselor suggests that we head to Palaven's moon, Menai, which is currently being attacked by the Reapers. Primarch Fedorian is there, and he's going to have a heavy hand in deciding the military response against the Reapers. Once again, we are caught up in a political game. I should point out, since Anderson decided to stay on Earth, Udina is now the human counselor. Even though I picked Anderson as the counselor back in Mass Effect 1, a massive decision at the end of the game, the last decision at the end of the game, it didn't really matter in the end. He showed up in Mass Effect 2 for one scene and talked about politics and then was gone. I don't really mind the choice being overthrown, but at least make it have some sort of impact on the game itself. Why was that choice so important if it was only going to result in one extra scene of dialogue? The Council is skeptical of the Prothean weapon, which is called the Crucible. They never used the weapon because they needed one more piece, the catalyst, but construction begins regardless with the Alliance heading the project. Now, we can fully explore the Citadel in all its glory. Well, it's not really glory, because the Citadel has been changed greatly, and I don't really like this change over Mass Effect 2. Most of the areas we can visit are pretty small and linear. There are a ton of side quests in Mass Effect 3, a huge number upgrade from the previous game, but most all of them are fetch quests. A large number of them see us overhearing someone that needs an item and finding it through a mission or through one of the search and rescue missions, which we'll talk about in a moment. There is the nice addition of being able to see and talk to your crew on the Citadel, which is great and adds some more realism to the game. We'll find different members doing their own thing, just living normally as they would without Shepard around. A very common thread, though, is speaking to crew members in the embassy, who always seem to be standing at these windows and looking out of them, like it's some gorgeous view, but actually it's just traffic. That would be like the equivalent of standing inside of a gas station and watching cars go by. We now have access to a special room on the Citadel, the super secret Spectre Club room. Here we can check our Spectre terminal to make decisions about specific events, buy Spectre-specific equipment, and use the firing range. I talked to Commander Bailey, who was currently being berated by the intrusive reporter from the previous games. I convinced the disheartened Bailey to stick it out, that being commander wasn't all just politics. The reporter wanted to talk to me again, of course, and this time I finally won her over. She realized the error of her ways, and we settled our differences. I headed back to the Normandy, and suddenly I was somewhere else. A forest. I couldn't move. There was that kid again. I had to save him. I had to find him. I couldn't. I would fail. I would always fail. Not everyone could be saved. This dream sequence is pretty well done and is a testament to the cinematic finale that BioWare wanted to give the Mass Effect series. We'll have a few moments like this throughout the game. The theme here is apparent. Shepard's guilt is haunting him, and it's taking the form of a child, one that he couldn't save, an innocent one. It might have been different before. Shepard may have lost people and failed to save many, but seeing the specific face of this child, it changed things for him. Liara checked on me when I woke up, tried to make me feel better. I was introduced to Trainer, my new assistant aboard the Normandy. Hackett talks to us and tells us our main goal for this final entry, to make a strong and massive army that can fight off the Reapers. This is a huge and massive task, but something we'll have to do if we want to win. This leads us into the big new mechanic for Mass Effect 3, war assets. War assets are anything that contributes to the Reaper War. This could be people, armadas, armies, or items. We mostly get these from story missions or side quests. Large decisions will determine which war asset we get, usually deciding between two. When we check our war table, we can see how much each asset is contributing to the war. We need to get as much of this as we can to fight the Reaper War efficiently. The other place that we can get these assets is through the search and rescue system. This is basically the replacement for the mining in Mass Effect 2. We can scan different systems to search for war assets, quest items, and new locations. A lot of these systems are occupied by the Reapers, though, and more are taken over as the story progresses. When Reapers occupy a system, we can only scan it so many times before their awareness increases and we're chased out. Now, the entire war asset system is a representation of how much something contributes to the overall war. Effectively, in my eyes, it's a ranking system for how much something matters. Now, getting our total war assets up to a certain point will unlock an extra ending at the end of the game. Whether this ending is worth it or not is something debatable, and a topic we'll discuss later in the video. But ultimately, it unlocks what BioWare thinks or presents as the best ending. The big problem with all this is that a lot of characters from past games will be presented as war assets. Decisions we made in previous games will lead to us getting war assets. Most of these assets are really small. Saving Jack or Jacob in the suicide mission in Mass Effect 2 will leave them alive in Mass Effect 3. Because of this, we'll get an extra mission with them in this game and they'll become a war asset. I think BioWare really screwed up here because they're basically saying this number is how much your decision was worth. This effectively reduces saving characters in the suicide mission to a slight time save when playing through Mass Effect 3. It's just a really weird way to implement choices in the final entry. I think it would have worked better if BioWare evolved the formula they had for the last game, if each person played a part in the final assault, and that if they weren't there, the mission would be harder or would go worse, leading to a worse ending. Something a little more intricate rather than just numbers that lead up to a check. We'll talk about all that more when we talk about the endings, but this is our main goal for the game, to gather forces, troops, people, and items to be able to face the Reapers efficiently. I should also note that this system was greatly changed for the Legendary Edition version of Mass Effect 3. In the original entry, there was a complicated system called Galactic Readiness. This was effectively a multiplier that would determine how effective any of your war assets were. This could only be increased by playing the multiplayer mode, which is now gone, 2 mobile apps, which are now gone, and using a BioWare website, which is now gone. Because of this, Galactic Readiness has been completely removed from the game, and we just have whatever war assets are there. Now that we have the Normandy again, we can explore the place. Not too much has changed. We still have an assistant, a terminal to view emails, a private room, and our crew about the ship. The biggest difference here is that instead of learning more about your characters through loyalty missions, Mass Effect 3 allows you to have conversations with your crew aboard the ship. These conversations will allow you to learn more about them over the course of the game after completing missions. Liara is now on the ship. She has a terminal where super secret shadow broker information is available and upgrades to our abilities. We can talk to Diana in her room to do interviews with her after big events in the game. There's a whole new bay at the bottom of the ship where we can upgrade weapons, add mods to them, and even buy items from the Citadel stores with an upcharge for delivery. I talked to James down here as he got his frustrations out through a short boxing match. We have to head to Palaven now, or rather its moon, Menai, which are under attack by the Reapers. We have to find the Turian Primarch by helping out with the defenses here. This basically means killing husks and marauders while defending certain systems. Eventually, we meet up with an old friend, Garrus. He's here helping the war effort. The original Primarch, Fedorian, is actually dead, and we need to look for the next in line, Victus. We fight our way across the planet and eventually find him holding the line in some buildings. He agrees to come with us on our mission, but only if the Krogan come to Palaven and help the Turians defend their homeworld, a difficult task to make happen. I told Garrus to join our fight as well, who will now become a permanent squad mate. After we get back to the Normandy, we have a problem. EDI has been turned offline and none of the ship's systems are working. We head down to the lower decks to find out that EDI has taken control of Dr. Kor's body. She now has a physical vessel to travel around it. The next thing that I did was take part in a pretty important DLC mission. This was the From Ashes DLC and takes place on Eden Prime. There was a pretty big controversy with this piece of content when it came out because it was Day 1 DLC. Most of the content was on the disc but required $10 to be unlocked. This is only one of the myriad of controversies that surround this game and its legacy, but I specifically remember people being really upset about this one. The DLC itself sees us heading to Eden Prime and finding a Prothean stasis pod, unearthed by an archaeological dig team. Cerberus is already here, and we have to head through the colony, finding different pieces of data from the pod. This shows us the last memories of a Prothean named Javik, who was trying to set up 1 million Prothean soldiers to survive into the next cycle. The Reapers got to them first, though, and he was the only one that survived into the stasis pod. Eventually, we get the pod open and Javik is inside. The last Prothean alive is now on the crew of the Normandy. Javik is actually probably one of my favorite companions in Mass Effect 3. The first reason is because he's just so unique. He's a Prothean. We've been hearing about them since the very beginning of the series. Actually getting to see and talk to one is incredibly interesting. Also, hearing his chatter about the current state of the world can be pretty funny.
To discover the most primitive races of my time now rule the galaxy. The Asari, the humans, the Turians.
There's also the Solarians.
The lizard people evolved.
I believe they're amphibian.
They used to eat flies.
Having a character that was alive 50,000 years ago is prime time for both good information, lore, and moments of comedy. There are a lot of side missions in Mass Effect 3 that don't matter too much. They might give us some extra war assets, which I guess do matter in the grand scheme of things, but a lot of things are reduced to defending a point against waves or grabbing an item from a planet. There are some side missions, ones that seem pretty innocuous at first, but result in some important information. For example, Grissom Academy, a space station that houses children who are exceptional in studies in biotics, was being attacked. I think of this place like Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters. Their station was under attack by Cerberus and I had to save some kids, but we quickly realized that we know one of the instructors here, Jack. Jack has been teaching kids how to harness their biotic powers and she hasn't changed a bit. That's not exactly true, though. It seems like Jack has found some sort of peace. She's found some sort of purpose in this world, teaching kids to control their biotics, to battle and become soldiers. We eventually get the kids and Jack out of there, who becomes a war asset. The game did bug at the end of this mission, and I saved a child who just wasn't there for a moment. Next, I stopped back in at the Citadel and found Miranda in the docks. She's been on the run from Cerberus and is trying to find her sister. She thinks her father had something to do with it. I offered to assist her, but she didn't need my help right now. I went to the Purgatory bar, and James wanted me to buy some drinks for Alliance soldiers, but I didn't think it was a good idea. I found a Solarian Spectre in the embassies who is looking for some Hanar operatives who may have been indoctrinated by the Reapers. He says he got intel from an anonymous source who he believes to be Kasumi Goto, the master thief. He's been hunting her down for years, and when we head back into the Spectre office, we find Kasumi there. She wants us to help her out and find this indoctrinated Hanar. We have to find stations all over the Citadel and eventually locate him. Kasumi watches this exchange while fully cloaked and eventually saves us from an explosion, hurting herself in the process. She's dead, but just when the Solarian leaves, she reveals that it was a fake death. Kasumi can actually die here if she wasn't loyal at the end of the previous game. She won't reveal the fake, and this would be the end of her arc. I found a VI that was modeled after myself on the cargo bay in the Citadel. It was a decommissioned unit because it stopped working, but it still had some lines in it. It didn't sound like me at all.
Good to meet you. I'm Commander Shepard, Alliance Navy.
I found Thane in the Memorial Hospital. He was practicing his moves in front of a window. Turns out Keprel syndrome has been getting to Thane, and he won't live long. I wanted him to join our mission, but his condition was bad enough that he needed to stay close to medical attention. I checked on Ashley again, who was awake now. I grabbed her a book of poems by Tennyson. I remembered that she liked those. She had been offered the position of Spectre by Udina. She needed some time to think about the decision, but I told her that I was here for her. I headed back to the ship, and it was time to deal with the next priority, Surkesh. This mission actually starts on the Normandy. Primarch Victus and Rex, the head of Clan Erdnot, are arguing. Victus wants the Krogans to help by protecting Palaven, and Rex wants payment for his species' help as well, a cure for the genophage. Someone has been working on a cure, a Solarian on Surkesh. They have the only surviving female Krogan who has been cured of the genophage. Of course, the Solarian leader doesn't want this to happen, and neither do the Turians, but it has to happen. This chain of events needs to occur if everyone is going to work together to defeat the Reapers. The Krogan need to be cured. They would be a massive fighting force for our armies. It must be pretty strange to be a Krogan and see so many instances of a cure pop up and see everyone around you say, "No, your people must stay suppressed. We don't trust you." It's such a strange dynamic that Mass Effect has concocted, but one that's so interesting and is really close to the heart of the story it tells. We head down to Surkesh and Rex tries to go rogue, being restrained by the Solarians eventually. We meet Paddock Wicks, who is the Solarian leading the work for a cure. This would have been Morden Solus had he not died in my playthrough. This is another big problem with Mass Effect 3, is that, for the most part, if a character died in Mass Effect 2, their part in the story will just be replaced with someone else, a similar character with similar capabilities. This isn't true for everyone. If Garrus didn't survive, then we just wouldn't meet him on Palaven, but it almost exhibits a strange lack of free will in the world of Mass Effect. It's as if we're seeing into two timelines, and no matter what we do, destiny would take control and make these events happen anyways. While we see the last surviving female Krogan, Cerberus begins to attack, and we have to escort an elevator with Paddock and the Krogan on it while we fend off waves of Cerberus. Once saved, the Krogan is released and shows that she doesn't really need protecting. Back on the ship, Hackett says that the Crucible has begun production, all hands on deck to finish the project. Wick says that they've named the female Krogan Eve, and she's on the ship now. Rex and Victus both still have problems to discuss, but don't want to talk about it in front of each other. Victus wants us to find a Turian ship that went down over Tuchanka, and Rex wants us to find some Krogan scouts in the Attican Traverse. If we go to Rex's mission, we find Grunt, who is with the Ara Locke Company, and they find out the Rachni are living there. On top of that, they're being controlled by the Reapers. We find the Rachni Queen that I saved in the first game, and she's the main one being controlled. I decided to destroy her, and Grunt sacrificed himself to get us out of there. Just kidding, he's alive. This is another consequence of the suicide mission. If Grunt was loyal at the end of the game, then he'll live here. This mission alone actually has a lot riding on it from previous entry choices. If we killed the Rachni Queen in the first game, then a new Rachni Queen will be here, and deciding to let her join the war effort will make her mistrust us later. She'll leave the crew, taking her war assets with her and damaging some of our own. If we let her join us and we save the Queen from the first game, then she doesn't do this. Also, Grunt's fate relies on our choices surrounding him from the previous game. It's a pretty good carryover from the first two entries, and it's nice to see that some things we did can actually affect fates and characters. I did some extra side missions, helped out Victus's men, and defused a bomb that was left on Tuchanka by the Turians a long time ago. This, of course, increased tensions between Victus and Rex. Before we headed off to Tuchanka, I headed back to the Citadel. I visited Ashley, who was up and moving around now. She had accepted the Spectre status. I did a couple side missions and left the place. With all that done, it's now time to head to the next main story mission, Priority Tuchanka. The goal of this one is to cure the genophage. This mission and storyline is great. This is the finale of everything that we built up to in Mass Effect. What's the largest thing that we could possibly think of outside of the Reaper invasion? The genophage. It has affected the Krogan for so long now, and forcing the other species' hands to make them cure it to be able to win the war is a genius move. Wix has begun refining the cure for the genophage. The cure's stability will depend on whether we saved Malin's data in Mass Effect 2. Since we did, it will be stable. The way the cure will be distributed is through the Shroud, a massive purification plant on Tuchanka. It was used to send out the genophage, and it will be used to send out the cure. A Reaper is already guarding the Shroud, so we have to deal with that first. Before we leave, Dalatras, the head of the Solarian people, contacts us. Apparently, the Shroud was already sabotaged. It would nullify a cure that was put through it. The Solarians want us to leave this intact and let the people think that the cure just didn't work. I told Dalatras that I wouldn't do it. I couldn't do it. The Solarians were worried about what the Krogan would do when they repopulated. They had so many grudges against the other races. They may wage war as soon as the Reaper invasion was over, but that wasn't the problem now. We needed the Krogan, and they deserved a cure. They deserved to prosper for once. On Tuchanka, we move across the planet. We eventually get separated from the team because a road is destroyed. We have to head through some old ruins which show Tuchanka from before the destruction. At the Shroud, Eve thinks we should use the Maw Hammers. These are large devices that will summon Kalros, the mother of the Thresher Maws. We do this and it takes out the Reaper. Inside, Wix is working on the cure. There's quite a few variables here to this mission. If we got Malin's data in Mass Effect 2, then Eve will live through the experiments. If not, she's dead when we get here. We can tell the crew about the sabotage in the Shroud, which will determine how fast Wix or Morden finds it. We can actually convince them to stop the cure as well, and just walk away. Morden or Wix can even be killed here. Of course, I didn't do that. Eve lived through the experiments, and I told Wix about the sabotage, and he decided that he needed to go up there alone to make sure the cure worked, sacrificing his own life for the mission. Now, I will say, this is one of the few times where this mission works much better with the normal companion. If Mordin is here, then him sacrificing his life to save the Krogan is a much better character arc than Wix. We don't really know Wix or have much background on him, but Mordin we do know. He has fought and struggled with the moral quandary of the genophage and his part in it. Finally realizing his wrongs and being able to make peace with his actions is a perfect end to his character. But Wix also can represent that same sentiment. Not with necessarily as much depth as Mordin, but he is a Solarian. I'm sure anyone involved in researching the genophage feels some sort of guilt and burden that they carry for their species' actions against the Krogan people. It's a similar story, but one that carries a lot more impact if we know the character beforehand. In any case, we cured the genophage, and Eve was alive. Rex thanked me for what we did for his people. The short speech he gives is a great insight into Krogan culture. He talks about killing his father and the Krogans fighting amongst themselves, showing that the genophage reduced them to this, and now that it's cured, means they don't have to do this anymore. They can try and live, try and thrive, rather than constantly fighting and clawing their way into life. The Turians and Krogan are both a part of the force working against the Reapers now. I went to sleep and had another dream of the child. I would do this again and again every night. I would never save them. I could never save them. Liara stops in to tell me that the Solarian counselor wanted to talk. He was disappointed in me for curing the genophage. He didn't like Udina, and they found some evidence that he was shadily moving money around. He wanted me to come to the Citadel. As we arrive, Thane radios in and tells us that Cerberus is openly attacking the Citadel. We track down and find the Solarian counselor by battling through tons of Cerberus agents. Eventually, we find him and he's attacked by Kai Leng, a Cerberus assassin. Thane jumped in. He'd been following us. He saved the counselor, but was stabbed in the battle. We have to chase Kai Leng up some elevators, and I somehow slipped through the bounds of the game and got to see the Citadel from above. The launch of the Legendary Edition itself was pretty buggy, with a lot of them being fixed by patches, but I encountered the most during Mass Effect 3. It's just still pretty janky. There's not a lot that's game-breaking, but too many to not point it out. At the top of the elevators, we have a huge moment. Ashley is there with the Council. This is the moment when all of the mistrust that she's had comes to fruition. Here, the game checks to see how well the Viermeyer survivor, either Ashley or Kaiden, trusts us. I visited Ashley in the hospital, tried to convince her I wasn't working with Cerberus on Mars, romanced her in the first game, and didn't cheat on her. These all contributed to her trusting me, so she sided with me. If we don't do these things, the Viermeyer survivor will turn on us and they'll be shot. We turned on Udina, though, who was the one behind all this. He pushed the Asari counselor down and Ashley shot him. We see the elusive man talking to Kai Leng. He says he has something up his sleeve, other plans. He vows to not let Shepard get away next time. I made my way around the Citadel once again. A lot of our meandering around the Citadel results in us basically speaking to people, siding with someone in an argument, doing short side quests, etc., all to get war assets. We can also shop at stores and use the Spectre terminal to make decisions that could upgrade or downgrade war assets. One special event that did have impact involved Thane. He wasn't strong enough to recover from his wounds. He was dying in his hospital room, so I went to see him. His son was there, and I got to talk to him a bit before he died.
Commander, I'm afraid I won't be joining you again.
You've done more than enough, Thane.
That assassin should be embarrassed. A terminally ill Drow managed to stop him from reaching his target.
I'll pass the word along.
Thane using the last days of his life to stop an assassin, when he spent most of his life feeling guilty about his family, about the lives he had taken, is a powerful end to his arc. There are a lot of things you can say about Mass Effect 3. Things it doesn't do right, things it gets wrong. But you can't say that it doesn't respect its characters, and at least try to give them a fitting end. Thane prayed before he died, and Thane's son and I read a passage over his body, sending him into the afterlife.
Guide this one to where the traveler never tires, the lover never leaves, the hungry never starve. Guide this one, Galahira, and he will be a companion to you as he was to me. Call yet? There's something I don't understand. His last moments were those of a hero. Why pray for salvation?
The prayer was not for him, Commander. He has already asked forgiveness for the lives he has taken. His wish was for you.
Before I headed back to the Normandy, Ashley wanted to talk to me. She felt regret that she didn't see the truth about Udina sooner, and that she didn't trust me from the start. She was offered a job by Hackett, but she wanted to come aboard the Normandy. I allowed her. She was finally back on the team, for good. We can invite quite a few people up to our cabin in the Normandy to have different conversations. Some of these get a little saucy, but that isn't the only purpose. Liara wanted to talk to me about something she was working on. It was a device that would act like the Prothean beacons had, but for our civilization. Effectively a time capsule that would provide the next cycle with information that might save them if we failed our mission. She wanted to know what the beacon should say about me. I told her to decide for me. She knew me. I didn't want to write my own story. I'd want it to be written by others that knew me. I played chess with Traynor and got interviewed by Diana. She started to flirt with me, but I told her we should keep this professional. On Arai, there were a group of ex-Cerberus scientists in trouble. Jacob is here. He met a woman named Bryn Cole, and they're having a child. Cole is leading the scientists here, and we have to help them get out of the system. Liara found a distress call from an Asari monastery, one where they keep their Ardat Yakshi. The Ardat Yakshi area is a strange part of Asari culture, one that they themselves aren't particularly proud of. It's a genetic disease that changes their mating ritual. When they mate, they will kill their partner and effectively become stronger from it. It's also quite addictive for them, so they become shunned from their culture. Morinth from Mass Effect 2 was an Ardat Yakshi, Samara's daughter. The Reapers are attacking the monastery, and Samara is there, trying to save her daughters. In the end, Rila, Samara's daughter, stayed behind to set off a bomb that would destroy the Reaper presence there. Samara's Justicar code demanded that she kill any Ardat Yakshi that left the monastery, one of which was her daughter. To avoid this, she decided she wanted to end her own life. I stopped her from doing this. She became a war asset and made an effort to help in the war against the Reapers. I talked to Miranda, who was still working on finding her sister. She knows that her father is involved now, possibly working with Cerberus themselves. She's still on the run from them and decides to take on the mission by herself. Zaid's appearance in Mass Effect 3 is really small and mostly unimportant. Victus sends us on a mission to find a Volus ambassador who might be working with Cerberus. We find out he is, mostly because he was blackmailed, but Zaid is guarding him. If he was loyal, he doesn't die guarding the Volus. If he is, then he's alive. We have a short conversation with him before he's gone. I talked to Jack back in Purgatory and Ashley at a memorial wall for the people who had died on the Citadel. She found her sister and finally talked to her. Now it's time for the next part of the main story, Priority Rannoch. This begins with a short conversation aboard the Normandy. The Quarians have decided to offer their help building the Crucible. The only problem is they want something first, to take back their homeworld, Rannoch, from the Geth. The Geth have been upgraded by Reaper tech and are much stronger now. Tali is with the Quarians and joins our ship once again. We have to stop a Geth dreadnought out in space. It's a central controlling point for the Geth fleet. Inside, we find that it's being controlled by a Geth VI. If Legion would have lived, then he would be here, controlling the thing. This kind of is Legion, but also kind of isn't. We escape the ship, and the Geth comes with us. The Quarians wanted to study it, but I turned them down. Before we head to Rannoch itself, there's a couple things to do. We have to head down to Rannoch and disable some anti-air guns. Then we get some information from the Geth VI, who tells us there's a large server building where the Geth are attacking from. Reaper code has taken it over, and we can hack it. We have to walk around a virtual room, making our way across platforms and using a weapon to blast strands of virus out of the way. We'll unlock memories as we go of the Geth's history, their sentience, their interactions with the Quarians, and their curiosities about life, whether they have souls or not. We finally get to head down to Rannoch. We have to find the Reaper that is sending its code to the Geth and take it out. Tali takes a moment to reflect on the fact that she has actually finally stepped foot on Rannoch. She wonders what it'll be like to live here, to make a life here. We fight our way into the facility and find the Reaper. It chases us and we eventually get blasted onto a small outcropping. Here we have to call down a missile assault onto the Reaper itself to destroy it. To do this, we have to avoid the Reaper beam that's coming at us by dodging out of the way. I'll be honest, this took me a couple tries because the movement felt really odd at first. The locating beam that we have to fire actually moves faster if we stand still, so dodging and then standing while firing the beam is the best option. Eventually, we destroy the Reaper. And now we have a choice: to let the Geth take the code from the Reapers and upload it to all of them, effectively upgrading themselves into full AI, or destroy it. This decides the war between the Quarians and the Geth, who will win. There's also a third option here, to broker peace between these two, but it's a really difficult and complicated check to pass. We need 80% of our reputation bar, Tali and Legion have to both be alive, and we have to have completed one of the Rannoch missions, which we did. This is just the check to unlock the persuasion option. Unfortunately, Legion was dead in my playthrough. If you do unlock the check, you still have a tally of points that come from decisions in Mass Effect 2 and 3, helping Tali at the fleet by not presenting her father's evidence, doing Legion's loyalty mission, resolving the argument between the two in the last game, saving Admiral Chorus. These will all get you the persuasion option you need to secure peace between the two races. I couldn't do this though, so I had to make a choice. There's really no right answer here, to be honest. The Quarians created a species of sentient AIs and then tried to massacre them when they rose up. The Geth spent years hunting down Quarians and destroying an entire people. But honestly, the Geth were more powerful now and would be more useful in the war to come. I didn't want to do this to Tali, but I had to. I upgraded the Geth, and the Quarians were destroyed, wiped out forever. Tali took off her mask and jumped off the cliff close by. I tried to save her, but it didn't work. I couldn't save everyone. The Geth were thankful for the upgrade, that I chose to stay by their side. They pledged to help us in the war moving forward. The Geth are now actually a people. They're individuals now. The Asari counselor hails us to the Citadel to talk about something important. There we find out that Thessia, the Asari homeworld, has come under attack. There's something on the planet which may be crucial to finding the catalyst, the thing we need for the Crucible to work. We have to fight our way through tons and tons of Reaper foes here. Huge Ravagers, quick and devastating Banshees, and hordes of husks. We arrive at the Black Site, which is the Temple of Atham. We find out that the Asari have been hiding a Prothean beacon for themselves all this time. It's here in the temple and houses a Prothean VI named Vendetta. It shuts down quickly, though, because its procedures turn off when it can tell someone is indoctrinated. Kai Lang arrives to have us talk with the Elusive Man. Cerberus already knew about the temple. The Elusive Man still thinks that the Reapers want to control us, not destroy us. I tried to convince him that he's being brainwashed by the Reapers, but he wouldn't listen. He sends Kai Lang after us. He's quick, uses sweeping attacks, and lots of melee. We have to take down his shields and he'll retreat to power back up while his ships send a barrage of firepower our way. Eventually we take him down, but not really, because we didn't even hurt him. The barrage begins to collapse the temple and we fall below as they make off with the VI. A massive failure, nothing gained whatsoever, a huge blow to morale and the war effort in general. We need to come up with a new plan fast, and Traynor has tracked Kai Lang to Sanctuary, a safe haven for war refugees. Once there, we find out that the whole thing is a sham. The facility is actually managing research into indoctrination, owned by Cerberus. The refugees are just being indoctrinated and experimented on. Miranda has reason to be here as well, and we see video messages left behind from her as we track our way through the base. We find out that her father is the one running the colony. Eventually, we find the man who's holding his own daughter hostage. I convinced him to let her go, and Miranda killed him. Miranda was already wounded by the time I got there, and she didn't make it out alive. The whole thing can go many ways. Miranda can shoot her father, we can let him go if she isn't there. Miranda can live or die based on many checks of her loyalty and behavior throughout the game. Now, this is the point where we enter the end game. Starting the next mission will set us on course for the finale. We're not exactly going to do that just yet because there's a couple DLCs that we need to talk about first. Mass Effect 3 has a ton of DLC, actually totaling up to a full $60 worth, an entire extra game price on top of the one you just bought. We'll talk about the extended cut and the changes made to the ending later, and some of these are also just weapon packs. There's really two that I wanted to talk about for the moment, Leviathan and Citadel. Leviathan is the first DLC task that we'll take on. We get an email from Hackett about a Dr. Bryson on the Citadel that has information on the Reapers. We find him and he's quickly shot by his indoctrinated assistant. EDI looks over the lab and finds out Bryson was researching something called the Leviathan. We have to find pieces of information through the lab that will narrow down the search and eventually single out one place in the galaxy. We have to seek out Dr. Garneau, who is trapped on a station full of indoctrinated workers. Garneau is also indoctrinated and blows up the artifact. This removes the mind control from the inhabitants, and they say they saw the artifact, and they think it's 2176, 10 years earlier. Back at the lab, we hear a voicemail from Bryson's daughter, who is also looking for Leviathan artifacts. She's found one, and we track her down to save her from the Reaper forces. It starts to indoctrinate her, so we destroy it. We use Bryson's daughter to track down the Leviathan, which lives on a planet covered in water. The being disables the shuttles until we make contact with it. It lives in the water, so we have to use a mech to actually find it. The Leviathan is a Reaper. Well, not really. The Leviathans created the Reapers millions of years ago. They tried to help out the smaller races, but they began to rise up and they created an AI that would preserve life at all costs. The AI decided to kill the Leviathans and harvested them, creating the first Reaper, Harbinger. I convinced them to join the war effort and finally fight against their creations. This is a pretty important piece of lore in the history of Mass Effect. This DLC answers many questions, like where the Reapers came from, who created them, why they were created in the first place. It's just a shame that in the beginning they locked it behind a paywall because it honestly feels like it could have been just a part of the main story. It would have made sense that the team would want to seek out the creators of the Reapers to fight them off. The second DLC I'd like to quickly go over is the Citadel. The Citadel was the last full DLC released for the game on March 5th, 2013, a full year after the game's original release. This short story was mostly designed in response to criticism that the game didn't have a great send-off for the characters in the main story. It was meant to be a final goodbye to the cast of the characters that we'd seen so far. The DLC gives you access to Anderson's apartment, which we can now use. Here we have a private terminal and can start the Citadel questline. This starts when Joker invites us out to sushi. There we realize Joker didn't invite us. Brooks, an Alliance agent, tells us that some other organization led us here. Just then they infiltrate the restaurant with a really cringy Dark Knight Joker reference.
Gentlemen, tonight's performance is brought to you by random acts of violence.
There's a stealth section, which is the only other spot I remember being able to use the quick kill option from behind a barrier. We eventually have to get evac'd out of the situation and find out who was tracking us down. Liara has tracked down the culprit to an arms dealer on the Citadel. We have a heist-like mission in a casino where we have to distract guards and take out camera systems. Eventually we find the man dead, and Brooks fails to trace the killer. We find out that there's a Shepard clone that was made by Cerberus. We have to chase him through some Citadel archives that show us some interesting information from the past, in particular, the First Contact War and Genophage. At the end, we find out Brooks was working with the fake Shepard. We get locked in a vault, and eventually fake Shepard takes control of the Normandy. We have to fight our way back and eventually face both him and Brooks at the bottom of the ship. Shepard hangs off the end of the ship and we can decide to kill or save him. I obviously decided to save him, but he decided to jump off himself. This is only the first part of the content that the Citadel DLC contributes to the game, but it's actually a pretty fun story, all things considered. I will say there are certain points where every character becomes the comic relief. No one plays the straight man here. Everyone just cracks jokes constantly. I understand that this is the tone that they were going for, a fun, lighthearted relief from the horrors of war, but it just felt like a little much at times. It didn't ruin anything, and a lot of the jokes are actually pretty funny.
I am tired of being locked in time capsules.
He said, I should go. Do I sound like that?
Yes, yes you do.
Maybe we should be worrying about the impregnable vault we've been sealed inside forever.
The overall tone is pretty good too, because this whole DLC feels like a one-off adventure, like a made-for-TV special surrounding a normal show. It's pretty great, and it creates a better bond with the team overall, having everyone involved in one place. Now that that's all done, we can have a party back at Anderson's apartment. Here we can talk to each of the crew in different groups while they're drinking and having fun. The next morning, everyone's hungover, and we can head out onto the strip. This is another area of the Citadel that's unlocked with this DLC. There's tons of stuff to do here. We can reconnect with companions and even participate in a pretty cool combat arena for tokens that can be exchanged for prizes. Overall, the whole thing is actually a great addition to the game and feels like a fantastic time all around. The extra games, the storyline, the content with squad mates are all welcome, and it feels like it repairs some of the complaints that people had with the base game. Now that those DLC are out of the way, it's time to enter into the finale. There's 2 final missions we have to take care of here. We can now head to the Kronos station, which is Cerberus headquarters. Before we left, Ashley came up to my apartment, and we rekindled what we had years ago. When I fell asleep, though, he was there, and I still couldn't save him. I couldn't even save myself. We have to make our way through the station, fighting tons of Cerberus men on the way. We can find information on Project Lazarus, the initiative that brought Shepard back to life. We reach the center of the base, which holds the core of the human Reaper that we defeated in Mass Effect 2. This shows that Cerberus still grabbed it, either way. Didn't matter what decision we made there, they'd still get something from it. At the end of this mission, we reach the Elusive Man's room, the place that we saw talking to him all those times, but he isn't here. It's Kai Lang. But it's too little too late for our salvation, because the Reapers have begun the assault on the Citadel. We find out that it's the catalyst we were looking for all along, and it's been moved into Reaper-controlled space above Earth. Kai Lang is ready to fight once again, and this time we take him out for good. I moved to look at the Elusive Man's computer, but Kai Lang was still alive again. He attacked me and I took him out. Anderson lets us know that the Citadel is above Earth. We have to head there and make our final push against the Reapers. We make our way to the final front, talking to some of our crew before we leave. I gave a rousing speech before we headed into our last battle. We have to fight hordes of Reaper foes, an amount of enemies that increases and never stops coming. We eventually make it to the beam, the lift that will take us to the Citadel. We're wounded before we can make it there. We have a slow walk with a wounded Shepard that reminds me of the microwave scene in MGS4, except a lot shorter and not nearly as good. We make it to the Citadel, which is now full of broken bodies. We can hear Anderson, who is there as well, making his way to the controls. At the top, we find the Elusive Man and Anderson. The head of Cerberus himself is in front of us, and he's clearly become corrupted, controlled. The Elusive Man controlled both of us and forced me to shoot Anderson. He wanted me to fall in line with his plan, with the Reapers themselves, but I couldn't. I convinced him that his plan was futile, and he took his own life. The Crucible made it. It was ready to be used, and I sat down with Anderson as we relished in the win that we made. Hundreds of thousands of lives lost along the way. A bloody, terrible war, but we did it. Finally, this was the end. The Crucible isn't working, though. Someone needs to activate it, so I headed up. There, we're met with the catalyst itself. It's taking the form of the boy from Earth. It explains that the Reapers were meant to keep species from growing too powerful and wiping out all life in the galaxy. It's a method that has lasted for quite a while, but something that doesn't work anymore. It finally gives us a choice, the final choice. We can control the Reapers, something that the Elusive Man couldn't do, or destroy the Reapers and all synthetic life with it. I decided to control the Reapers. This was the only thing to do, to use them for my advantage. Was the elusive man right? But he wouldn't have been able to do this. He wouldn't have handled this power correctly. He was too corrupt. If I could become one with them, we could use it to better the galaxy, to advance civilization far past where it currently was. Not only that, but we could end all of this. I did it, and I couldn't help but see everyone from my past before me. During my final moments as me, I thought of them. Joker and crew pulled out of the system before the Crucible activated. The Reapers stood down and the fighting stopped. Joker, Ashley, and Javik crawled out of the crashed Normandy, still alive to see what the world would become. Our epilogue is narrated by Shepard as the new consciousness of the Reapers. We see the aftermath of the war, each of these surviving characters and where they are now. Jack teaching students, Samara with her daughter, Kasumi, Rex, and Krogans, the Reapers helping the galaxy rebuild. The surviving crew finally added a plaque to the memorial on the ship. John Shepard. We finally see the Normandy being repaired, and the Mass Effect Trilogy is over. Before we move on to talk about the Renegade playthrough, I'd like to talk about the ending of Mass Effect and the reception of the game entirely. The ending that we just watched was not what the original ending to Mass Effect 3 looked like when it was released. If you've never heard anything about it, fans were not too happy when Mass Effect 3 came out. The ending was very poorly received, and most people felt like we didn't get to see the aftermath of what happened, that each ending was just some variation of a different color. It lacked the impact that fans felt that they deserved after 3 games. The build-up to this ending was immense. It was years in the making, 3 games and countless hours of playtime. So when it finally released and people just realized it was 3 choices that boiled down to red, blue, or green, they were upset and frustrated. There was a campaign called Retake Mass Effect, started to get a better ending to the game. Some people were even claiming that there should be some sort of punishment because BioWare had falsely advertised the game. It was a huge mess, and I played Mass Effect 3 on release. I remember all of these, and at the time I hadn't really seen anything like this outrage before. At the time, I was 16 and really didn't know what all the fuss was about. I didn't love the ending, but I didn't think it was god-awful. Shortly after this, BioWare released a free DLC pack called The Extended Cut, which aimed to amend the ending, add some extra cutscenes, content, and a voiced-over epilogue. This would hopefully give fans the ending that they wanted. I never played the Extended Cut until this review, because I just never went back to Mass Effect 3. Playing it now, I don't really think it affects things that much. It tries to keep some consistency and explain some logistics, but I don't really think it addressed what fans wanted it to. It also added another ending, a 4th, that would let Shepard reject the choice altogether and continue the cycle further. The ending itself isn't great, but it definitely isn't the worst thing in the world. People still complain about it to this day, and I don't really think it's that offensive. There are 4 endings in total: Control, the one that we chose, Destroy, Synthesis, and Reject. Each ending has variables depending on how many war assets you had on completion of the game. For the most part, the Destroy ending sees a lot of the galaxy being wiped out. If you had higher war assets, then it sees basically a wiped out galaxy, but if you have lower, some people survive. The Control ending will see Shepard controlling the Reapers. If you have high war assets, Joker and the crew will survive and the Normandy will take off the jungle planet. If you have low war assets, Earth is massively damaged and the crew of the Normandy don't survive. The Synthesis ending is what the game thinks is the best ending. Earth is not destroyed, the mass relays and Citadel are not destroyed, the Normandy crew survives, and all organics and synthetics are merged. Synthetics are now both organic and synthetic, and organics are both as well. The Reapers become allies and join into the galaxy. The refusal ending means that the Reapers are allowed to wipe out the galaxy and the cycle continues. We only see a shot of Liara's time capsule buried underground, left for the next civilization to find. Most of these endings are just okay. The real problem I have is with the synthesis ending, and it's kind of why I didn't choose it in my Paragon playthrough. It's supposed to be the best ending in the series. It's the hardest one to get after all, because you have to have a high amount of war assets to unlock it. But personally, I don't think changing everyone in the galaxy's core makeup to that of half synthetic, half organic without their A-OK is an alright choice. Sure, everyone lives and there's no damage and the Reapers are friends now, but it seems kind of intrusive. Also, the series culminating in this organics versus synthetics thing seems to be a very weird reduction of the complex issues that we've had in the previous entries. Listen, there are definitely problems with Mass Effect's ending, don't get me wrong, but it's not all bad. A lot of people were upset that the only way to save Shepard in the original was the destroy ending, but I don't think Shepard should have lived. I think that this was the perfect end to his arc. Sacrificing himself for the good of the galaxy was the only thing that made sense, even if it means he became half Reaper himself. After the credits, we get a strange scene with an anonymous individual talking to a child. This reveals that the whole game was a retelling of Shepard's story long after he's been gone. The Stargazer, as the character narrating is called, is actually voiced by Buzz Aldrin, oddly enough. I don't really mind this, but I definitely wouldn't have put this scene here. It just seems odd to include this little section at the end. It feels kind of hacky, in my opinion. Also, is it just me, or is this child here not actually a game model of a child, but an adult man just sized down? It might just be me, but that's what it looks like. Mass Effect 3 is a flawed game, for sure, and it's probably my least favorite in the trilogy, but I don't think it deserves the hate that it's gotten. It was definitely a game that wasn't fully cooked. It needed maybe another year to flesh things out and bounce ideas around to try and find a satisfying end to the series, but it definitely isn't a terrible, awful end. It's just an alright one. But I've always thought about this game more as the journey rather than the destination. Now, before we get into my final thoughts on the final game in the Mass Effect Trilogy, let's talk about my Renegade playthrough. For this playthrough, I used my Renegade character from the previous games, Jacoby Shepard. Jacoby Shepard takes no shit, and he gets things done. He's a difficult man to work with. He demands everything from everyone. He killed Rex and the Rachni Queen, let many of his crew die during the suicide mission, most notably his lover, Jack. But I want to look at Jacoby's time during the third game, the final battle with the Reapers. The story we already talked about in Mass Effect 3 with Shepard was one of triumph, goodbyes, winning in the face of adversity. This story is not that. This is a story of a man barely hanging on, of a man close to the end and unsure if he can make it, lashing out at everyone around him, confidence, bravado, hubris. I was stripped of my ship and my command. The committee wanted to see me, but they didn't know anything. They knew the Reapers were coming, but they didn't notify me. Now they wanted to talk about galactic threats. After all these years, all these times I tried to get them to listen, they wouldn't. And now they wanted my help? They wouldn't get it. A child was crawling around the vents during a damn Reaper war. Seemed like a silly thing to do at a time like this. I was about to escape Earth, but Anderson was staying behind. He was staying here to die for no reason, helping no one. I was getting out of here. The child in the vents died. I left Earth. People were being massacred around me. I tried to tell them. I tried to tell them all, but they wouldn't listen. Idiots. We went to Mars to look for an artifact. Kaidan didn't trust me. Thought I was working with Cerberus. What do I care if he trusts me or not? I saw the elusive man again. He didn't believe I could defeat the Reapers. Watch me. Dr. Kor smashed Kaidan's face in, and I took her down. We took him back to the Citadel, and I got Dr. Michelle to join my crew, as well as Diana Allers. Kaidan was sleeping. I told him to get up. He wasn't doing any good here. I went to talk to the Council. Oh yeah, the Council is back. Even though we destroyed them in the first game, they're just here. I talked to the reporter again. I punched her, but she dodged, so I headbutted her. I had a dream about the child on Earth. Why did I care about him? Did I care about him? He was just another loss to the Reapers. Nameless. Never mind. I talked to James and he wanted a fight, so I didn't hold back. I went to Palaven and Garrus was there, the Turian guy from before. I told Victus I needed the Turians to get this done. He joined me, and Garrus as well. Edie had a body now. That's fine, I guess. We rescued the Prothean Javik from Eden Prime. I met Miranda again, and she was looking for her sister, but I didn't have time to help her with that. The Krogans wanted the genophage cured, so we had to figure that out now. It's not enough that the Reapers were attacking the galaxy. Reeve wanted us to cure a disease that's been racking us for ages. Great. We headed to Surkesh and got Eve off the planet. Before we get further into the story, I'd like to talk about my class through my Renegade playthrough. I chose Vanguard again for this character, meaning I had more biotic powers with them. The ammo that the soldier gets is good, and it's pretty versatile for dealing with all enemy types, but by God are the biotics OP in this game. You can just dash straight to an enemy and then hit them with a ground slam called Nova to decimate everything around you. Don't get me wrong, it feels pretty good, but it makes an already easy game a walk in the park. I saved the Turians and disabled the bomb on Tuchanka. I talked to Kaiden, who was offered Spectre status. We headed down to Tuchanka to try and cure the genophage. We made our way to the Shroud, and Wix found the sabotage in the equipment. He knew I was trying to stop him. I told him not to cure the genophage. Eve was dead, and if the genophage was cured, Reeve would start a massive galactic war. He sided with me, and decided to let the Krogan think he died making a cure. The trick wouldn't last long, but it would work for now. I saw the boy in my dreams again. Why wouldn't he leave me be? We headed back to the Citadel, with word that Udina might be a traitor. I tried to save the Solarian counselor, but he was killed by Kai Lang. Kaiden didn't trust me. Never did. I drew weapons on him. He was wrong. Too stupid to know the difference between someone trying to help him and stab him in the back. Thankfully, Kaiden sided with me. I shot Udina when he pulled a weapon. When I headed back to my ship, Kaiden wanted to join my crew again. I told him no. He was a traitor. He didn't trust me when it mattered the most. I couldn't have someone like that on my crew. The Quarians wanted help taking their planet back. We took out a dreadnought and grabbed a Geth VI. I headed down to Rannoch and took out the Reaper. The Quarians wanted me to destroy the Geth code, effectively killing all of them. I couldn't save synthetics, no matter how powerful. They were robots. Gross. The Geth tried to turn on me, and we took it out. The Geth were gone, and the Quarians were on my side. Back on the Normandy, I invited Allers up to my room. She was no Jack, but she was nice. Thessia was under attack. We made our way there and found a Prothean beacon. The elusive man tried to convince me again, but it wouldn't work. I fended off Kai Lang, but we failed. Liara showed me her time capsule. I told her to make me look like a hero to the next people, because I was one. On Horizon, I found Miranda and her father. He wouldn't let Oriana go, so I shot her in the leg. A non-fatal blow. She'd be fine. Miranda killed her father. Miranda died. We were heading to Cerberus headquarters. Of course, that child couldn't help but haunt me one final time. Bastard. Why couldn't you have lived? Why didn't you take another shuttle? On the Chronos station, I faced Kai Lang and killed him this time, in style. The Citadel was attacking Earth. One last battle. I knew this was my end. I wasn't making it out of here alive. I didn't even want to at this point. We found our way through Earth. I made my way to the Citadel. The elusive man made me shoot Anderson, and he killed him. I shot the elusive man. He couldn't stand up to me, even with Reaper tech. Idiot. I stared at the Crucible as it docked. This was it. I finally did it. I showed them. I showed all of them. It wasn't working. One last push and it would all be over. The Catalyst wanted me to make a decision, but I didn't want to make one. I didn't care about any of this. I wasn't going to be a part of this game, play into these rules. Leave it for the next guy. I'm done. The beacon that Liara made was the only thing to survive. At least I'd be remembered as a hero. Mass Effect 3 is an interesting game. Overall, I really don't hate it, and I don't think it's a bad game, but I can also understand that I'm playing this game in 2022 with the Legendary Edition of the game, with the Extended Cut DLC, with the Citadel DLC. What I'm playing is ultimately a different product than what was released in 2012. I can definitely understand why people would be upset with the product and ending that they got. I still don't think the outrage was proportional, though. It was a little too much for what actually happened. The game's combat is pretty good, albeit a little easy. The shooting is a lot tighter in this entry. It's probably the best use of weapons and biotics that the series has. Mowing down a group of husks or taking out a powerful banshee feels like an accomplishment. The story itself isn't bad either for the most part. It really ups the stakes from the previous games. We're ending entire conflicts here, dealing with the genophage, ending the war between the Quarians and the Geth. These galactic conflicts that have existed since before we even started seeing them are dealt with in this entry. The whole thing is much larger in scope than either of the first two games that we've played previously. Each companion also has a pretty lengthy story associated with them. Talking to them aboard the Normandy or on the Citadel will develop them over time. I think I prefer the structure of something like Mass Effect 2, but it's not bad here. The ending itself isn't terrible, it's not great, and it's definitely not what I would have chosen, but it's fine. See, that's the issue that I have surrounding everything with the complaints for Mass Effect 3. It didn't live up to expectations, but it's not a terrible game. The weaker parts of the game are mediocre. They're not bad. Even at its worst, Mass Effect 3 is still a pretty competent game. Interesting combat, good systems, and a pretty great story. I will say the worst thing about this entry is how certain choices we made in previous games seem to either be ignored or reduced to numbers on a screen. It's a little disheartening to see that surviving crew members just resort to being a sliver of an upgrade for our war assets. Some choices, like the Council and Human Counselor, are just completely ignored. Characters that died are mostly just replaced, as if they never mattered to the world of Mass Effect at all. I can understand why this would upset some people, though. It kind of spits in the face of the things that the players did in the previous games. There's also some perspective that has to be had here, though. Clearly, the team was going for a more cinematic feel with this entry. They wanted this massive last game, this finale, to be more of a movie than a video game in certain regards. They wanted to send the series off with a bang. They clearly had a very specific idea of where they wanted the story to go. They made it much more streamlined than other games. Normally, this is a good thing, but in a choice-based narrative, this means sacrificing freedom. The other thing we have to talk about here is how the developers had their own kind of freedom with the previous two games. They could let players make all the choices they wanted in Mass Effect 1 and 2. Letting them see the consequences of these actions would be for Mass Effect 3, not for now. But when it came time to actually see a lot of those consequences, it turned out to be a little harder to do, while also telling a cohesive story. There's also the fact that this game was a little rushed in development. It definitely needed a longer cycle, and I feel like they could have fixed a lot of these things that annoyed or bothered fans. I will say that certain choices that people think don't matter kind of do. The perfect example is Mordin. Yes, if he dies, he's replaced by Paddock, and we can still cure the genophage, but the arc that Paddock has is much less impactful than Mordin in that same position. Giving the character an entire extra game to develop and put their motivations out there makes it that much harder to see them go in the final entry. Overall, I don't really mind Mass Effect 3. It's not an amazing game, but it's pretty good. It's still probably my least favorite in the series overall, though, because it's kind of hard to go up against the likes of Mass Effect 1 and 2. Mass Effect 3 sold 1.3 million physical units in its first month, doubling sales of the previous entry in its debut month. EA reported that by May, the game had grossed over $200 million. The game won a few awards, Best Game of the Year from Game Informer, and Best Overall RPG from IGN. Fans were clearly upset at the ending and some of the choices made with the final entry in the series. Critics, though, gave the game universal acclaim, the Xbox version of the game holding a 93 on Metacritic. The game was the last in the trilogy, the entry we'd been building up to for 5 years. That may have been the last story with Shepard and his crew, but there's one more game in the Mass Effect series that we haven't covered. We'll talk about that next time. Bye, Dad.